Friends, welcome back to Cultural Savage. This week, I have the pleasure of talking with Abby Norman. She is a pastor, teacher, mother, and wife who lives and loves in the city of Atlanta. She has two kids, a naughty dog, and a husband she married before her brain was fully developed. She's very glad that it worked out as well as it has. Abby pastors a small church on the outskirts of Atlanta suburbs and still has enough words to continue blogging and showing up regularly on all social media outlets as at Abby Norman Says. Abby has a book coming out in May of 2021 from Broadleaf Press. It's called You Can Talk to God Like That, The Surprising Power of Lament to Save Your Faith. Abby, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm actually good, which I feel like a couple of days ago would not have said that.
Well, I'm glad you're good now.
Yeah.
It definitely varies from day to day. That is definitely the truth. Yeah, so we've been following each other on Twitter and Facebook for
A
a
long
long
time.
time. Yeah. But for those that don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit of your story, where you are, how you got to where you are, just a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I was I grew up in what I call like the evangelical 90s, early 2000s. Like not a super conservative church. We didn't nothing. It was all implicit, right? Nothing was like
Mm,
they would never say that a woman couldn't be a pastor, but like they also didn't hire women pastors, but they would like that wouldn't be said, something that was said out loud.
right.
Like the difference sort of between fundamentalist Christianity and the Christianity I was raised in is that like we didn't have a purity ball or anything, but I did buy my own purity ring at a Christian
Right.
concert, and so it's like um but everything was sort of implicit. All the gross stuff I feel like was really implicit, but my parents are both people of faith and whose faith I still respect a lot.
Mhm.
And so I grew up and went to college, and me and my husband got married while I was still in college, and then we moved to Atlanta because God told us to. So we have these that's just like what we felt, was
Yeah.
that God told us to move to Atlanta. We moved to Atlanta. He got this great job out of nowhere coaching the Morehouse speech and debate team, which was a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And meanwhile, I started teaching in on the south side of Atlanta in a town called College Park, which is famous because Ludacris came out of the high school that I first started
What?
teaching at, right? So we had graduated from Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. You can imagine that with him at Morehouse and me at Banneker, that perhaps we just suddenly realized like, oh, the world does not work like we thought it did. Because suddenly we were basically the only white people we were hanging out with every day. Joined a Southern Baptist church plant before we knew it was Southern Baptist. And I knew that we had I knew I wasn't really a Southern Baptist doctrinally, but also they were just really good people and they were really kind and they
Right.
would hang out with us. And when my husband went to speech and debate tournaments for the weekend, the pastor's wife would be like, hey, do you want to sleep on my couch? So that was just, they were just like so kind.
Hmm.
But as I started blogging, I just sort of felt like this story is wild and I cannot explain it now in my current system. But I was at, believe it or not, a Beth Moore conference, like a Women in Faith conference,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
God told me to start blogging, like
Rad.
very clearly. And I was like, okay. And so then I did, and then I blogged my way right out of the Southern Baptist Church and right into Methodist Seminary. So now I am pursuing ordination and working part-time as a pastor, and then working full-time as an online teacher, which needs clarified in this moment. It's an online academy even when everyone else goes to school.
Okay. Well, very cool. You have a story. You
Yeah.
have some wild stuff in there. So God told you to start blogging, like full on burning bush, like
Kind of.
yeah.
So in my book I talk about this. So I think that people's relationship with God is just wildly different, and
Mm-hmm.
so one of the beefs that I just have with Christian sort of personalities in general is that they can be so prescriptive, and I'm like, that's fine for you. Like, that seems like a thing you should be doing. I'm not sure we should put that on everybody. And one of the things is, like, I have always talked to God any kind of way, and God has always returned the favor with me.
Nice.
So even like when I was pretty young, I would just let God have it when I wanted to. But then when I feel like I hear from God, it is not, some people have these like really soft and loving and kind moments with God. And for me, that experience is often like God being like, you sure that's a good idea? Like when I knew we needed to leave the Baptist church. I just knew it was time to go. I couldn't reconcile our beliefs with their beliefs anymore. And one of the big things was that I told them, I said, I feel like I'm called to the ministry in some way. And they were like, yeah, we'll pray about it. And then that was literally the last thing I ever heard.
Wow.
And yeah, and when I asked the head pastor to talk about it, he was like, why don't you and your husband and me and my wife get coffee? And I was like, I don't want to get coffee. Like, I'm asking you what women can do in the church. And then basically he was like, a woman who is not yet, like, basically he was like, a theoretical woman could preach here, but I don't feel like there are any women that should be preaching here right now. And this was a man who was super careful about like giving Black men the pulpit, like all kinds of men, like Asian men, like, well, any straight men.
Right.
But he could see, like, I have a really different perspective than this Black guy, but he couldn't get past. Like he just was like, no, I mean, theoretically, a theoretical woman could preach in the pulpit. And I was like, when's that going to happen? And he basically was like, when I feel like it's time. That church doesn't exist anymore. And surprise, it was never time,
Right.
So I just knew, like, okay, we can't be here anymore. My husband and I had started reading a lot more and had become gay affirming. And so every once in a while, like, usually a guest pastor would just say something that we were like, stop. And so we just knew we had to go. And so I was driving. So I remember telling God, like, an artist community that I was a part of just like completely crumbled. My husband was like, hey, I know I said I was only going to be in graduate school for 4 years, but I need a 5th year. And I know that means that you have to go back to teaching another year and you don't want to. And then something else happened too. I forget what the third thing was. And we knew it was time to leave the church. And I was like, God, I cannot church shop. I can't do it. I don't have it in me. I can't do it. Like, you have to give me a sign because I'm not going to make it. And I was driving to Target to pick up diapers, and the church that we ended up at for like 4 years and where I received a call to the Methodist church had put out their actual literal sign. It said creative, historic, inclusive.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear sign.
And I was like, oh, God, you think you're so funny? And God was like, yeah, that's hilarious. You asked for a sign. And then I sent this really mean email to the pastor, and he responded very kindly. It wasn't mean. It was just extremely direct.
Yeah.
It was like, I need to know where you stand on these issues. I need to know how many women you have in leadership. I mean, it was like clearly the chip on the shoulder email. And he was like, I'm so glad you asked. So few people care about that. Is all the details you asked for. And if you want to get a beer, we can. And I was like, see you on Sunday. I cry in church a lot. And he was like, great.
That's great. It's great.
Yeah.
I love stories like that where it's just this wild ride. Like it doesn't fit into a nice, neat little box of like, this is what you do. You church shop and you're nice to the pastor and you feel things out. And yeah, I love that. Now you said in there that you talk to God, however, and I'm wondering. I'm wondering. Not to be prescriptive.
No, that's okay.
But how, as a pastor, how would you help people embody that kind of freedom?
Well, I think so everything is a practice, right? One of the things that I like to talk about when you talk about practicing Christianity, like that means you can be bad at it, because you're just practicing. Like, and nobody thinks that, I'm like, no, we're practicing Christians, which means like some of us might be terrible at it, but we're just going to keep practicing until we get better. And so, I think there needs, as a pastor, I hope there's a lot of modeling, right? I think one of the reasons Nadia Bolz-Weber is so popular is because people are like, I didn't know you could talk to God like that. I didn't know you could do that. And then not just that, but then if you listen to her enough, you can hear how to do it. So we learn how to pray, we learn how to praise, we learn how to talk to God by hearing how other people do it. And I think one of the problems is that and as a pastor, I'm totally guilty of this because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want them to call my district superintendent, but we don't hear like the prayers where I really go after it with God are the ones that I keep to myself.
Right.
And part of that is because people don't know how to respond to them. And then that's like that just like snowballs because it's like, well, we don't know how to pray any kind of way because we never hear anyone do it. Mm-hmm. And we don't hear anyone do it, so we don't know how to respond to it. So then when somebody does,
everybody gets the cringe.
Then we respond poorly. And then the other people watching it are like, well, I'm not doing that. So then nobody hears it. So I think it is a thing that needs to be learned and needs to be practiced. Yeah. Because I don't imagine someone growing up in a church in America and then like just being good at lament. Like well, I say that and I'm like, maybe, and the white churches are the worst at it.
Yes.
Yeah, because there is all of the lament songs that I can always think of when people ask me about songs of lament are Black spirituals.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I want to caveat that with like, well, the white churches.
Well, it's true though. And I mean, myself personally, I would extend it a little farther because I think that the health and wealth and prosperity gospel is so pervasive that like you don't talk to God that way because God gives you the victory.
Right.
And you don't talk to God that way because God's giving you your best life. And white churches are totally into that. And it's moving along because everybody wants to grow like a white church.
Right. And I have a lot of thoughts even about what you said, like grow like that, about like, what do we mean when we talk about church success and church growth? I attempted, or the Methodists asked me to reboot a church and I tried and it didn't work for a lot of reasons. And it just is like everybody. And one of the reasons is because like some of the ways they told me to grow it, I was like, but that's gross. Like I don't want to do that. I just don't. And I was quarter time. And so, it's like, well, the church is paying me 10 hours a week. So no, I cannot have, 2 events per week or whatever. Like, I do Bible study on Thursdays and I do Sunday morning, and that is it. That's all you're getting from me.
Yeah.
But yeah, because the church has seriously bought into the idea that it's a business. And so then they try to use all these business models.
Yeah.
And yeah, attractional, right? Like, how do you have that's the word. Like, how do you have an attractional church? How do you have an attractional model for a church? And that's one of the reasons that all these charismatic dudes get away with all the abuse that they get away with.
Yes.
Because attractional churches are usually based on cults of personality. And
yes.
Micah Murray and I talk once a month about how me and him should start a cult. But we're not going to. But we thought about it. Because it's like, it just is, right? But I'm really weary of churches who are based on cults of personality. Like, I think that's really, really dangerous.
I agree. So how can us learning to talk to God however, and to lament and to grieve in public, not just rejoice, not just be happy clappy, like, but the quote negative emotions, and I put those in quotes because
right, because they're just emotions.
Yeah, they're just emotions. Yeah. But like, how can us leaning into those things fight against this idea of a cult of personality, or this idea of like the narcissistic pastor, things like that?
Well, I think that starting with the millennials and then especially Gen Z are very put off by cult of personality, actually. I think it's one of the like, they just are. They're like, that guy, no. So I think that's really helpful, is that each generation sort of becomes inoculated from the thing that attracted the last generation. And so I don't know who tweeted it. I read it 2 days ago. I've been obsessed with it. But there was a tweet that said, one of the things, like one of the great sorrows of the world is that we long to be in a community and we end up in an audience.
Oh,
I know. And I was like,
oh,
yeah, we long. Our deepest longing is to be in community, except for what we know how to do is be in an audience.
Yeah.
And also, like, that's how people make money off of us.
Yeah.
Is like audience members rather than community members. Also, community members get more of a say than audience members, and some people don't like that.
Right.
But I think that we need, to be, I think a lament empowers us to be better at community with each other. And I think that one of the things that it can do for us is recognize like what we need and what makes us hurt and what we need when we're hurting. So I actually have like so in the chapters in my book, every single one has an exercise at the end. So when you're like, how do we lament? Like, I actually pulled a psalm and then I used it as there's a formula. So as an English teacher, I'm into that, right? Because you can't just tell people to write poetry. Like, they're like, I can't do that. So it's like plug and play. So you're like, write about this, write about that, And then that turns into your Psalm of Laments. And one of the other things that I did is talk about lament in the community. And then I have you make a list of like, what do I want when I am in crisis? Because that is not the same thing. I think about me and my sister. So what I want are presents. Like, I had a hell of a summer. If you were following me on Twitter, you knew, like, pandemic. Then we got bed bugs.
Yeah.
And then I had to go to Toledo for 3 weeks to basically to be my dad's caretaker until he had his surgery. Um, we came back and our kitchen imploded. And like we
Yeah.
like lost the kitchen floor, and like our foundation on our house was wonky. So we had to get that fixed. And then our car engine died, and we had to get a new car engine. Like it was like, and that was all in the span of like less than 2 months. It was just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And my book was due.
Yeah, I remember that. You were like, how?
Right. And so it was like pandemic, bed bugs, like serious parental health crisis. I mean, like I drove to my parents' house and stayed for 3 weeks in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And so it was like kitchen remodel you didn't want, car engine, and it just was like this. It was just like thing after thing after thing. Oh, church closing, closed a church in the middle of that. That's not
Right.
traumatic or anything. And I mean, people were like, "Oh my gosh, Abby, what do you need?" And I basically was like, "I need you to send me presents. Like
Mm.
that's what I need. I need." And so especially like Megan Westrow sent me 20 pounds of gummy bears but in like those 2 months because she's like that. She was like, "Well, I can do that," and I
Yeah.
got like I was totally sustained by like people on the internet being like, "What's your address? I have a card for you. Here's a $5 Starbucks gift card. Here are these gummy bears." Like my kids are like, "I can't wait to grow up and write a book because that means that your friends all send you candy." And I was like, "No, that's me. Like that's your mom. Not everyone has that experience."
Yeah.
But that's what I need. So my sister Jill is not like that. She had twins at the very beginning of the pandemic.
Wow.
She needs somebody to go on a walk with her every day for 15 minutes. And she's
Hmm.
always been like that. She needs somebody there. She needs somebody with her.
Yeah.
I like am delighted by presents. They make me feel better. She needs somebody with her. Um my friend I
Yes,
love it
that is
so
my
much.
child.
Here for
Yes.
all of that. Like my like what do you need? Like I think my friend Lizzie went through this horrible divorce and she needed distractions.
Hmm.
She just needed distractions. So I am terrible at distractions. I want to like sit on your porch with you and drink wine and I will cry with you all day long.
Right.
And she was like, "No, you need to learn to send me funny memes." So then it's like a matter of like, what do you do? And then what are you good at? And what is your first inclination when someone is in crisis, So
Mm-hmm.
if we could recognize like, what do I need? And then also, what am I good at in times when we aren't lamenting? Like, what if a church of 100 people, not even a big church, had a spreadsheet and it was like, this person likes to be fed when they lament. And I am from the Midwest, and my like immediate reaction to any major thing in your life is I would like to send you a casserole. Like I need to like I need to make sure that everybody is fed.
Yeah.
And so what do you need, and then who can provide that? But that requires a level of honesty that is not happening at the church. Because that
Yeah.
requires you being like, I'm sad, I'm not okay, I need help. This is the kind of help I need. Like that's really hard to
That
do
that
when you
that is. A lot
yeah,
of people I feel like a lot of people are so out of touch with themselves, they don't even know what they need.
right.
Like you're going through this whole thing of like, what you need in lament. I'm like, if I'm lamenting, I have no idea what I need because I've been told this is how this is what you get when you lament. You get
Mm-hmm.
people to sit with you. You get people to cry with you. You get people to tell you to buck up. You get people that sometimes will support you behind the scenes a little bit, but not necessarily tailored to like, no, no, no. I am lamenting. This is what I need.
Right.
And that's crazy. I feel like I'm so out of touch with that.
Right. Because
How
it's
how
yeah.
how do you? I mean, is it just the practice of lament?
Yeah, I think you have to practice. I also think it's okay to, like, at the end of a crisis, to kind of step back and be like, what helped? I
Mm,
also think, like, the thing that we don't talk about with all of this is like time and money, because those are class issues, where
very
it's
true.
like some people don't have time. I mean, um, you need time to lament. Like, that just, it takes time.
Yeah.
And not everybody has it. I mean, I remember when I didn't have it. Like, when I did not have the time to do anything but, like, our kids are 16 months apart. Our second daughter was born a month into my husband's PhD program.
Mm,
He defended his dissertation the same day I went to orientation for seminary.
mm,
So there was like a period of time when what we needed, both my grandparents died in the midst of that. And honestly, what we needed were babysitters, because we needed
mm.
time
Yeah.
to, like, sit on the back porch and cry, because who has time for that when you have all that going on? And then like, in times of crisis, like, no one wants to talk about money, but it's
Right.
like that's often what would make it better.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing that would help. And so um there's this idea that the church benevolence fund is for somebody else, but it's not for me.
Well, it's also a matter of like who opens up and is like, I need help this way,
Right.
because
And
then
also
then
it's
then we're
it's a
not
matter.
self-sufficient.
Yeah. And then you have to admit you're not right. Then you have to admit you're not self-sufficient. Then you have, in unhealthier churches, then there are strings attached,
Yeah.
like, then there's expectations, and that can be really hard.
And then there's
And
gossip, and
right.
whether that exists or not, everyone is scared of it,
Right.
because what's going to be said about me.
Right.
So really what you're talking about is, if we give in to lament, like really give into it and learn it, we have to create safe places for each other
Right.
to actually lament and learn what that means for us.
Right. And we have to recognize, like, you're not going to do it the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And, like, that's okay.
Mm.
And I think we have to really accept, like, oh, this was helpful for me. That does not mean it's helpful for this other person. Like, I wish that we pastored. I wish that pastors pastored a more like I was taught to teach. So I was taught to teach, like, okay, you got 35 kids in the room. How do you reach all 35 kids? You're going to have to use at least 5 different strategies, because
Right.
brains are not the same. That is like a day one accepted practice of teaching.
Right.
Nobody told me in seminary, nobody tells pastors, like, yo, you're going to need, like, a really big bag of tricks,
Right.
because you have a lot of different
Everybody
kinds
goes
of
for the
people.
sermon, and you learn from the sermon, and then
Right.
you engage your emotions in songs, and that's all that you have.
Right. Unless that doesn't work for you. And then you're like, why do we do this? This is dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish that pastors had, like, a wider bag of pastoring tricks, so they could be like, how do you, like, lament? Like, how do you lament? Are you a quiet lamenter? Are you a vent? Like, I'm a venter. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
need to just blah, like, all of it needs to come out. Maybe with somebody, maybe without, I don't know. Like, I would love every church in America to have a place you could just, like, chuck plates at things. Like, I think that's a really good idea.
That is a brilliant idea, is what that
Like,
is.
yeah, I see that you're angry. So we just went to the Goodwill and here's 300 plates. Like, that's the plate corner. Throw to the left so you don't hurt anyone. Okay.
What about non-pastors? Like, how can people just in the pews, how can they not just lament themselves, but encourage other people to have that
So,
safe place?
yeah, just doing it in front of people is super helpful, because they, um, because people, it's weird, right? It's like that one person doing it gives them a lot of permission. So the church that I ended up at, Eastside Church, it's like more upper middle class than I was used to.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody was just like really like, they're like, I'm fine, it's good, we're handling it. And then there's me, like my children who I call the crazy daisies, and who I like have always said I just want to raise them wild and free. And right, so then we showed up, and I'm like crying, like ugly face crying every day for 2 months, every Sunday for like 2 months. I would just like, they would be like, this table is open to everyone, and I would just be like like, and, like my kids are like dancing in the aisles, and I'm letting them and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, these people must think I'm nuts. And then like 4 or 5 months later, I start getting these texts from these women who I thought just had it all together. And they were like, they would text me things like, what do you do when you're mad at God? Or like, how do you get out of feeling like as stuck as your blog said you felt? I'm like, oh, you're not fine. Like,
Yeah.
and so I think that the permission, right, just with someone else doing it, really gives the community like just more and more permission to do the thing.
That makes sense. That's hard though,
Oh
because
my gosh.
like being the first person to pull the trigger and be like, hey, here's my shit, welcome, hi.
Right.
Like that is so terrifying.
It's so hard. It's really hard. And like we talked about before, like so many people then just want to fix it because we're just so uncomfortable with like, this isn't okay. And Stephanie Tate and Kate Bowler talk about like this, like we want to believe that we can inoculate ourselves from the bad things that happen to other people. And so if we can fix it for them, then that means that like we've isolated the problem.
Yeah.
And if you can isolate the problem, then that means that problem won't happen to you because we have it figured out. It's fine.
Right. So if it does happen, I know how to solve it.
Right. And quickly.
Yeah, and quickly and get back to normal.
Right. And we can prevent it.
Right.
And if you look at the way that people, and myself for sure included, like have been surviving the pandemic, it's been so much of that.
Yeah.
Like we started school in August, so we're on like week 4.
Mm-hmm.
And the grief hit me so hard the first week of school, because I realized, I was talking to my husband and I was like, I mean, I guess I knew it wasn't true, but like, I just felt like in March, like, okay, we just have to hang on until school starts again.
Right.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us were like, all right, we're going to have a horrible summer and then school's going to start again and we're going to be okay.
Right.
And so like this huge new wave of grief came on me because it was like, that didn't happen. Yeah. I don't know how to do, I convinced myself I knew how to do this for X amount of months. I don't know how to do this long term.
Yeah.
And it's like when people ask me like, how is online school going? I'm like, well, there are tips and tricks to make it better, but it's not good.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be good.
And everybody wants it to be good.
And everybody wants you to tell them it's good. Yeah. And everybody wants it to be good. And I think, I'm about to have some really hard conversations about what Christmas is going to look like.
Yeah.
Because we're not having a candlelit church inside. That is not.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what do we want to do? Do we want to skip it? And do you want me to give you a liturgy for your house? Right. But we're not going to pretend that this is better or okay or the same, because it's not. It's terrible and it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. But everybody wants to just be like, oh, this is just temporary. This is just an alternative. This is just
Right.
or the assholes that are like, no, we're gonna keep meeting and keep doing what we do because we need
Because we can,
normalcy.
because we cannot even face the truth that it's not, that stuff isn't okay.
Yeah.
Like we can't even face the reality that is like right in front of us. And it's like, if you can't even face it, then how are you going to talk to God about it? How are you going to talk to each other about it?
Yeah.
Like you have to, what I call say the says.
Yeah.
You have to, or else you can't, I mean, or else you're stuck.
So what do you think about lament as a paradigm shift? Like lamenting itself doing something to our cognitive brain that makes us look at things differently.
Oh, for sure. So in the Bible, lament is one of the ways that lament works is it's a tool for the oppressed to bring their attention to the people with power.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that God encourages is for the other people with power to align themselves with the oppressed.
Right. Yeah.
And so like in this day and age, that looks like if like aligning yourself with the Black Lives Matter protest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that really changes us.
Yeah.
To just like be willing to even hear the voices in the streets that are saying like, you're hurting me.
Mm.
Like this system is not okay and it's hurting me. Just being willing to align ourselves with that does make a huge difference. And I think it's really important to think about, well, like with lament and community, just the paradigm shift of being like, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to let you say that. I'm going to not interrupt you. I'm just going to be like, yeah, that's horrible. That's terrible. I think it builds a lot of resilience in us. So one of the things that we do not talk about, especially in the church, is failure. But all the research on failure shows that or resilience shows that you get resilience through failure.
Mm.
And so we could share that as a community.
Yeah.
Like you could be like, it didn't kill me. You guys see this with parents of kids, neurodivergent kids,
Mm-hmm.
where they're like, I hear you. It is really hard right now. It's going to be hard for a minute. It didn't kill me. In fact, now it's kind of delightful and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel like you're just failing all over the place.
Yeah.
And so there are certain like pockets that are really good about certain things. Like I do think parents of neurodivergent kids really have a knack at coming together with each other and allowing for lament.
Yeah.
Being like, yeah, it's hard. Like that diagnosis is hard. Figuring out how to potty train your kid is hard. We're
Yes,
going to
it
do it.
is. Yes,
It's so
it is.
hard. And you should be allowed to say that without anyone being like, without being expected to at the end of that say, but I'm so grateful. It's like, you actually don't have to be grateful for potty training. It can just be terrible.
Yeah.
Like, and saying that doesn't mean that you love your kid any less. It just means that part sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels, in my experience, the support we've gotten from one of my kids is autistic, and the support that we've gotten around like different programs and schooling and things like that has been really good. Like it's been good support. And then I compare that to the support that I would get in church in a typical white suburban American church.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'd be told that I need to fix him.
Right. And you're like, well, I know which group of people is being church to me.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that that's one of the things, like, I don't know, there's a lot of hand wringing. I'm a Methodist, so I tend to know that experience best about like, oh my gosh, everyone's leaving the church. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yep. Yes, that's true. And there is something to be said that like, you know, I don't know where I'm at a lot. They always blame the like kids sports programs. They're like, it's the kids sports programs. They used to not meet on Sunday and now they meet on Sunday. And I'm like, and also like maybe those moms are getting more support on the
Yeah.
bleachers than they did in the pews.
Yeah. So what about lamenting church? Like, how can we who aren't necessarily comfortable with the way that church typically is in America,
Mm-hmm.
how can we come together and lament that? Doing that thing of like maybe calling people out on their shit that have the power. Maybe just saying this sucks. We don't have a church home anymore. Or I mean, I came out of evangelicalism pretty hardcore, and it hurt when I stopped identifying as an evangelical. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was a grief.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. It was a grief. Yeah,
Yeah.
I experienced that also.
That was hard because that was my identity.
Right. And those were your people.
Yeah.
And so it's like with the, I know, I wonder, like I'm watching sort of people kind of grapple over the term evangelical still.
Yeah.
And it's like, I get it. Cause then you know whose you are, you know who you belong to.
Yeah.
And there's a word for it and it's helpful, but also it's like a safety net that was not real anyway.
Yeah.
You know, like it was like none of those knots were actually tied.
But the illusion of it is pretty
Oh,
like
it's so
comforting.
good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I jumped right from the evangelicals to the Methodists, who then like had the worst public fight you've ever seen in your life in the middle of my
Yeah.
seminary experience. I was like, what are these people are as crazy as the last ones, you know, like they're as mean and ugly to each other as the last. And I was like, yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really it's really hard. I think that um there are some really good liturgies, I think. Well, first you have to have like a, you know, people who are open to it. But there's some really good liturgies like sort of around lament. Um there oh shoot, what's her last name? Jan is her first name. She's a Methodist pastor, but she writes mostly now. And she um her husband passed away like super suddenly. And she writes about that. I mean, she just writes about grief really, really beautifully. And she has written some
Mm.
really great liturgies. Um, you know, I think that I'm seeing sort of like cracks that are letting lament in. Like I think about more and more churches are doing blue Christmas services.
Mm-hmm.
On the dark or like darkest night services
Right.
that are like specifically designed for people who are like, this is not a Merry Christmas. I hate it here.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful. But yeah, I do think there needs to be more space for lament, even in like corporate worship.
Yeah.
And like I think the most powerful, one of the things I really like about the communion service of the Episcopals and the Methodists, and I think the Presbyterians too, is they have this part where they're like, we confess that we screwed it up this week.
Yeah.
And I love that. My husband is like, I hate that part. I'm like, no, it's so good because you confess it and your neighbor confesses it. And then you go take communion together anyway.
Yeah. We have
Because like,
sinned against you by what we have done, by what
right.
we have not done.
Yeah.
We have not loved you with our whole hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He hates
Yeah.
that part. I love that part.
I love it too.
And I think it's good, it's good for us to just see like, oh yeah, I did that. And then also like, oh yeah, they did that too.
Yeah.
And like I think it really like can really crack the mold on like the perfect that we are obsessed with, like the perfect marriage or the perfect life or the perfect whatever.
Do you think
um
perfect is the enemy of healthy?
well, it's not real. It's like, well, that's not real, so.
Mm,
But it looks real, and again, if
yeah.
it attracts an audience, right? Perfect attracts an audience but can never attract a community, because you would have to.
All right, there's the poll quote right there. That's so good.
Yeah, perfect attracts an audience but it can never attract a community,
Wow.
because perfect shuts down the community.
Hmm. You got me thinking about all sorts of stuff. This is really good. So let me ask you, this is my favorite question to ask people. I
Okay.
love asking this one. In light of everything that we've talked about, lament, practicing Christianity, opening up to God, perfection, talking about how stuff sucks, in light of all of this stuff, what does this do to your articulation of the gospel?
Well, I think that it emphasizes the, like, come all who are weary and
Mm,
I will give you rest. You know, like like the church, the perfect church lady thing is exhausting. That like chasing perfection, even being the audience of that like fake perfection, is exhausting. Like lament is not about, like, lament and community, it's about coming weary and being honest about that and finding rest.
mm. Lament leads to rest.
Yeah, because if you're like, I
Yes.
can't do this anymore, sometimes God is like, then stop. Not that I would know anything about that.
No, not at all. Not at all. Wow. I've always resonated with that idea of like the downtrodden, the
Mm-hmm.
weary, those who need rest. I've always resonated with that because I feel that in my bones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, yeah. And if we didn't at the start of 2020, we certainly do now.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, of course we're tired.
It's a new level of exhaustion right now. Gosh.
I know. I look at my sister all the time. I'm like, I cannot believe you have 6-month-old twins that were born in February 2020. Like, I can't believe you can walk, let alone want to walk around the neighborhood with someone.
Yeah, seriously. But that's what she needs.
But that's what she needs.
That's so good. Well, Abby, thank you so much. You have been an absolute delight. You
Thanks.
are way smarter than I am, which I love.
I don't know if that's true.
No, it totally is. And I seriously can't wait for your book. Um, so the title of the book is "You Can Talk to God Like That: The Surprising
Yes.
Power of Lament to Save Your Faith." It's coming out from Broadleaf.
Mm-hmm.
And is it available for pre-order?
It is available for pre-order.
Awesome. Awesome. So everybody go check that out. I will put a link to it in the show notes so everybody can check it out. And Abby, you have a website, don't you?
AbbyNorman.net.
AbbyNorman.net, and on all social media outlets as @AbbyNormanSays.
Yes.
Abby, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, we'll talk to you later, okay?
Okay.
Bye.